bringing attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Hi everyone, this is Andy Steele, and here we are again. Today's interview is with Gery Warner. He's one of the experts featured in AE 9/11 Truth's documentary. That's at 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. We mention it all the time here on the show. Well, in this interview, he talks about the liquid that you can see streaming out of one of the Twin Towers on video before they were destroyed that day. And he also tells us the interesting story of his own awakening to the 9/11 evidence and some of the eye-opening stuff that he encountered along the way. So sit tight, we're going to get to that interview very shortly. Alright folks, time ticks along here. We still got a government shutdown going on. At least at the time of this recording, it's still going on, and nobody I know seems to notice except for the federal employees who aren't working right now. Of course, I won't comment on whether that's right or wrong, just that it gives the media something to fixate on and keep people divided and distracted. Alright, it helps prevent us from uniting on what is the most important issue, which of course is the cover-up of the facts surrounding the biggest mass murder in our history. And the reason this is the most important issue, of course, is because so much of what's going on right now, like the foreign adventures and the NSA spying on us and the drones being put up in the air to spy on us, are based on 9/11 and the fairy tale that our government and our media read to us as a bedtime story before putting us to sleep. And I'm not the kind of person who looks away from reality or who steps over the giant rotting corpse that's laying in the carpet in the middle of the white glove ball so I can grab another glass of wine from the bar. Alright, I don't care how much time passes. There's no statute of limitation when it comes to murder. This is an issue that people need to face, whether it makes them feel good or not. And if the folks out there think that they can just smirk at the evidence or ignore it and that it will all go away, they are sadly mistaken. Alright, this is not like a little kid asking for more cookies. This is murder. Terrible murder. And I challenge anybody out there listening to me right now to put your children in the place of those people who died that day. Imagine it. You know, people like Bobby McIlvaine, whose father has been on the show, and he's been out there up front for years saying that he knows an explosion killed his son. If you as a parent who lost a child on 9/11 had any suspicion whatsoever about the event, you would want people out there doing the work that AE 9/11 Truth does. Doing the work that the 9/11 Truth movement in general does. And it may not have the packaging and the billions of dollars of support from the money masters, but the truth is the truth, and that will beat out all of the magic and deception that they're throwing at us. And that's what they don't want. That's why they make a big point of saying there's no evidence of controlled demolition, even when you cite the evidence to them. Or they tell you they don't know what you're talking about, and they act like they never heard of Building 7 before. You'll see in the next compilation video of C-SPAN calls that's coming out, the part 4 that I'm putting together, Congresswoman Dan Schakowsky does that. It's ridiculous. Alright, she gets asked about Building 7 and she claims to not know anything about it. And maybe she doesn't, but if she doesn't know about it, that's sad. That's scary. That's an uninformed legislature. Alright, these people kind of remind me of Gollum from The Hobbit, you know. What is these Building 7s? There is no evidences. Alright, and that's pretty symbolic because if you remember in that movie, Gollum jealously guarded this magic ring that gave him all this power. That's what politicians are doing. Alright, they don't want to challenge the official story. They know that the machine will midget toss them out the door if they do, and then the phony perception of power that they hold on to will go away. They're happier with an illusion of being somebody special, when in reality, they're just being used like all of the people who vote for them are being used. So with that in mind, talking about The Hobbit, let me share with you a brief description of the quest, if you will, that me and Wayne Costi went on outside of the Hillary Clinton speech that happened at Hamilton College, which is near my home, last week. And it was one of those things we kind of just threw together, much of it at the last minute. But this is an example of what people can do. Very simple stuff. All right, we printed out some Rethink 9/11 pamphlets from rethink911.org and handed them out before the event as people were going to it. And let me tell you, we got cleaned out of them pretty quick. All right, I didn't have a single person refuse the pamphlet as I handed it out. And just a bit of advice, if you're a guy out there, you know, it helps if you dress nice and wear a tie. That's what we both did. We looked professional. It made us more non-threatening. And once we were cleaned out of the materials that we brought, we went into the speech. We had gotten tickets for it, and we listened to Hillary Clinton blah 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 and give a political speech and what is obviously an attempt to plant the seeds for a future presidential campaign. And I had asked one of the people organizing the event a week or so before it if there would be a question and answer session, and I was flat out told by this person that all the questions would be pre-screened, and indeed they were. People didn't even ask them themselves, okay? They were selected before, and then they were read by some woman who sat down with Hillary in this sort of inside the actor's studio format, all right? The audience wasn't engaged at all. It was like you're watching the Oprah Winfrey show or something. Obviously, that was done to keep somebody from saying they were going to talk about one thing, how do you cope with being an awesome woman in an awesome country? And then getting to the mic and spitting out something like, you know, Building 7 was brought down with controlled demolition. Why don't you talk about it? And I was very tempted to jump up during that whole phony session and ask Hillary, with everything being screened and staged, how she can handle being president of 300 million people that she's deathly afraid of. And certainly I wasn't afraid of doing it. It was actually harder for me not to do it than to do it. Wayne actually talked me out of it. The auditorium, I guess, it was too big. Not enough people would have heard me. I would have been escorted off campus, and then I wouldn't have been able to do what we were going to do next, which was we left the speech early, and then we went and stood at the exit where everyone was coming out, and they were herding out like cattle slowly, and we were holding, each of us, one end of an AE 9/11 truth banner that we had, and we're yelling out to them stuff about Building 7, asking them if they know a third tower fell that day, kind of like John the Baptist. All these things about Building 7, asking folks questions about 9/11. And some of them knew about Building 7. But this was effective because we were articulate, and most of the people there had never even been exposed to this issue before. And this is basically catching them off guard, you know, catching them coming down from their hill high and graffitiing all the phony garbage that Hillary was shoveling onto them during her tightly controlled early campaign stop there with the 9/11 truth message. And there was nothing anyone could do about it, all right, because we weren't disrupting the speech. The speech was already over. We weren't assaulting anyone. I could see that the campus security wasn't happy, obviously. There was this one uniformed officer. He was pacing back and forth, kind of like an angry troll, talking into his radio. But they didn't do anything to us. And the actual real police who were there didn't do anything either. So for the few minutes each person was within hearing range of us, they were hearing about the evidence. So, and another thing, Wayne picked up on this, and we used it during our action, is that Hillary said this during the speech. This is a direct quote. Many of our public debates are happening in what I like to call an evidence-free zone, where ideology trumps data and common sense. This is a recipe for paralysis, not progress, and this is not an example that we should be setting for the world. Man, that is truer than she intended, I guarantee. And, of course, it's relevant to 9/11. So, me and Wayne shouted as part of our mantra outside as people were coming out, avoid evidence-free zones. Look at the evidence. So, folks, you can do this. It's not hard. I don't ask anyone to do anything I wouldn't do myself. And this is something you can put together with a modicum of planning, all right? If you need advice, you can write to me, and I'll bestow you with some of my wisdom or get you in touch with somebody who's better suited to answer your question if I can't do it. But just make something happen. Anything. Finally, I want to make a quick programming announcement. You're going to notice this week that the format of the show has changed slightly, and I emphasize slightly, very, very small. The content of the show is still the same kinds of guests are going to be on. The only difference now is that when I pre-record the show, I'm going to be recording it in two different parts. One will be the news and commentary segment that you're listening to right now, and the other, of course, will be the interview. So I won't be recording it in one shot anymore with the guest waiting on the line while I talk to you in these first 10 or 15 minutes. Nothing is being taken away, though. I'll just be referring to the guests during the first segment in the past tense instead of the present. I think this is going to make the show better for a number of reasons. One, of those reasons is that I've gotten some complaints about my microphone and the sound quality on some episodes. And I appreciate the concern and criticism from the listeners. The problem, though, isn't the microphone. It's the fact that I've been recording the shows over the phone with the guests, and if the only way I can reach them is on their cell phone or their landline, then that affects the way my voice comes out in the final product, too. Now, I'm not going to be able to help that right now for the interview segment, which isn't as big a deal, I don't think, because the guests do most of the talking during that anyway. But in the opening segment where something like that counts more, I want to be able to come through to you loud and clear as I'm doing right now. So that's one reason for the change. Another is that it lets me be more up to date. If something happens, some kind of breaking news in 9/11 Truth, I can quickly include it in the show before it airs on Thursday, if we do it this way. So again, same show, nothing major has really changed, but I thought I would acknowledge it in case anybody noticed and wondered about it. Also, too, I mentioned last week that I want your emails, comments, your show tips. I've got a new, easier format for you to send those. Before I had you writing to a Gmail address in order to contact me. I will still check that email address for the time being, but now if you go to 911freefall.com, you'll see there is a contact form on the left-hand side of the screen. So you just put in your name, your email address, and the message you want to write to me in the proper boxes, and we will be incommunicado. So please write in. Tell me what's on your mind. I want to hear what you have to say. And one more announcement. This one is preliminary. I am working on a way for you to download the shows so you can listen to them on your MP3 player while you work or drive or whatever. And I'm also going to see about putting the videos of the shows up for download too, so you can grab them and air them wherever and whenever you want. Maybe you can get them on public access in your town. We'll see. I'm still developing a plan for that, but keep an eye out at 911freefall.com. That's going to be coming very shortly. All right, before I get to my interview with Gery Warner, we're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11, their families, and all of the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to take those 10 seconds starting now. And that is 10 seconds. All right, our guest this week is Gery Warner. Gery is one of the experts featured in 9/11 explosive evidence, Experts Speak Out. He spent 2 formative years as a project engineer for Alcan, that's the aluminum company of Canada. They poured thousands of tons of molten aluminum there, and he knows what it looks like. Gery, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Delighted to be with you.
Now, first, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background, education, and also include what first woke you up to the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence and what made you start speaking out about it?
Well, let's start with kind of going backwards. What made me start speaking out about it is it's the right thing to do, simply put. I mean, you can hide, I suppose, but there's no place to run to. You have to speak out on it. And as an engineer, I did it, if for nothing else, to redeem my profession. I mean, it was absolutely bewildering how these professionals, so-called professionals at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, could make the declarations they were doing. I mean, we swear an oath. At least in Canada, we do. You're calling Canada here. We swear an oath to put our interest far behind that of the public. We hold the public in high esteem, and we're to protect the public because who knows what we do? Who knows all the calculations and so forth? And so that's why we have a professional ethic, and we have to swear to behave and to hold the public in high regard and protect the public interest. So that's one of the things. But like most people at the time, I was busy. Of course, when 9/11 happened, actually, I was totally oblivious to it because I was in the mountains and I was we have a little ranch up in the remote wilderness site, and I was training a horse at the time. in a round pen. When I finally cranked out the star phone, or what do you call it, the satellite phone, and called my wife, she said, where have you been? I said, I've been here. She said, have you heard? I said, I heard a cougar off in the mountains and a deer. No, she said, the planes that hit the World Trade Center. I said, no, what are you talking about? So she told me what she saw on TV, and you know, that was kind of shocking. So I said, okay, I'll come right down. So I loaded the horses up and trundled down the mountain and stopped in at my Indian friend who lives at the base of the road some 9 miles away, and I said, have you heard of it? He said, yeah. He didn't say much, so just, yeah. Some years later, after I became aware of what happened, I asked him, did you know? He says, yeah, Whitey up to his usual tricks. Which I thought was an interesting comment. So I came down here, and then I just took it for what the media told us it was. The media and the government officials, that it was okay, planes flew into buildings, and I'm a mechanical engineer, not a structural. It seemed awfully odd that would happen. It's unprecedented. I'd never heard of it before, even though planes crash into buildings. Like in the Empire State Building, an aircraft crashed into that back in the 40s, and there was some damage to the building, but mostly it was damage to the aircraft. I mean, an aircraft is basically like a beer can. No matter how hard you throw it at a steel beam, I mean, if you send it at 1,000 miles an hour, it's not going to do much to the steel beam. So, and this beer cans and these aircraft were flying at somewhat less probably than 500 miles an hour anyway, around that. It's not very fast. So, you know, it was, although bewildering to me, I didn't really question it much. I didn't think about it. But my son kept calling me. He called me for years. He's an engineer, and he's with the Canadian military. But he wasn't calling as a military man. He was just calling as my son. And he said, Dad, you got to look at this stuff. You got to look at it. And I said, yeah. You know, I'm busy. He did this for years, but then I got a request for quotation from FEMA for a huge project, and it was for prison camps. And I wondered about that. I looked at these things, and it was like I think it was over $1 billion, and I couldn't get the bonding for it anyway, so I threw it in the garbage. But I did see the plans and everything, and it was a little odd. I didn't think they had that many felons and murderers that they needed to incarcerate in the United States. And then a few years later, I got another one from the American military, and it was for FOBs and FOPs for delivery in theater. And so I called the contractor, and I asked him, where's this going? He said, I can't tell you. That's top secret. I said, well, I guess that's pretty secret, but I can't deliver if I don't know where it's supposed to be delivered to. He says, you got me there. So I didn't say this, but I think Iran. I said, Iran, no, this is about 5 years ago. I said, Iran, what are you up to now? He says, well, it is what it is. I put the phone down. I'm a bit troubled. What the hell are we making war in Iran for? And just serendipitously, my son called again. He said, Dad, you got to look at this 9/11 stuff. It's causing all kinds of trouble all over the world. They're using it as an excuse. And if men like you don't look at this, you're an engineer. There's no hope for the rest of us. And, you know, it really hit me. So I spent a weekend poring over it, my valuable weekend, which I'm normally with my horses and having a good time. Spent the weekend looking at this stuff, and I came back from my office to my wife and another son. I sat down with them. I said, they really did it. I don't know who did it, but somebody did it, and it sure as hell didn't happen the way the government said. And they were a bit agitated because they said, this sounds like very dangerous information. I said, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but we've got to do something about it. Everybody's got to know about this. I paced the floor for for hours, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. What was I going to do with this? What do I do with this information? Who do I see? I went down to meet Richard Gage. I went down with my wife to meet Richard Gage at a meeting in a church in Tucson. And just to hear what I had to be sure about this. This is very important. This is more important than my business, more important than everything. And I heard what he had to say. I met a bunch of people. It was incredible because there was old, there was young, there was rich, there was poor, there was all sorts crowded into that old cathedral. And it was really, really something. And Richard only spoke about evidence. He only spoke about facts. There's no conspiracy theory or any of that. He only spoke about engineering, architectural facts, which is what we're used to dealing with. And if you have a bunch of things that are inexplicable, so you make several hypotheses, and if any one fact doesn't meet the hypothesis, you throw the whole hypothesis away and you try the next one, and so forth, until you get something that satisfies all the evidence. And I mean, that's how I found about it, and how it occurred to me. But it hit me like a sledgehammer when it finally occurred to me. Wow, somebody did this on purpose. They brought these buildings down. I mean, what did it was Building 7, where it fell it fell at free fall, which is acceleration due to gravity, 9.8 meters per second, 32.212 feet per second. And that's timed. If you dropped a bowling ball off the side, if you had the misfortune to have been standing on Building 7, the building they don't talk about, 47 stories high, and you were to release a bowling ball or a brick or something right from the roof top, at the same time the thing started dropping, the roof started dropping, you and the bowling ball or the brick would hit the ground at about the same time. I mean, you're talking about like very thick steel, structural steel, columns, and everything is made to stand up. And that building was super reinforced, super strong. It was one of the strongest high-rise buildings. And he was so strong. I mean, I think Giuliani had his secret office in there, and the IRS had their office in there, and the CIA had secret offices in there, the FBI and so forth, and all had strategic information stored in those places. And so it should not have, they did their homework. It should not have fallen.
Right, and I think I listened to you talking about that feeling where it hits you like a brick, and you say, wow, they really did this. You don't know who they are, but they really did it. I have those moments, too. I've had them in the middle of the night sometimes where I just come awake and I start thinking about those buildings. You know, when I go to New York, obviously the Twin Towers aren't there anymore, but just the buildings that are standing still are enough to give me vertigo by looking up. I can't imagine somebody having the arrogance, I guess, to say, hey, we're going to bring those down in the middle of New York City on a bright blue morning, and the people are going to buy it because we're going to tell them that if you don't buy it, you're unpatriotic. That arrogance of these people to think they can get away with this, and they did for a little while, but it's starting to slip from their fingers, and I feel like they're getting desperate. I also think that's interesting, too, as you told in your story about how you were at least getting proposals from the military-industrial complex. That's very interesting what you said about FEMA. It's very interesting what you said about the stuff for Iran. So this was actually affecting your life, touching your life, and it was very important, to say the least, that you see this information. Your son recognized that, and he was right to press it, I think, and obviously bring you over to our side.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't on any side, frankly. I mean, it's just okay. Here's a fact; these things fall down. But it conflicted with my information and the kind of, the Chicago formula, all those complex things that we go through in structural engineering when we study it. I'm not a structural engineer, but I studied structural engineering. I'm a mechanical. All those things that we study. I mean, you'd have to suspend you'd have to say that Newtonian physics did not exist for one day in a universe of days in New York at that time, 9/11. I mean, so otherwise, it had to be done by other means. I mean, it did happen. What happened? Okay, what's the hypothesis? Well, it looks like a controlled demolition. Is it a controlled demolition? They say it came down by fire. But, I mean, fire would take, for example, a house. And we've seen houses burn, and say they're made of wood. Okay, so one side would collapse before the other, because fire is sort of random. It goes wherever it finds it finds fuel and draws in air to feed it, because it needs oxygen to burn. And the blacker the smoke, the less the oxygen is getting in. If it's burning inside the house and you have black smoke roiling outside, and the fire rages. But in any case, it'll collapse on one side or the other. It won't all of a sudden pancake, as they said. It's really odd. But when you get into it, you know, you see, I mean, people get frightened of this because it disturbs their, the Japanese say, their their peace of mind. But you know, you get more. I get more peace of mind by knowing facts, by knowing information. So once you settle down and say, okay, it happened, and let's be cool, calm, and collected about this. It happened. Somebody did it. It's not my job as an engineer to figure out who did it, but I can tell people without any doubt in my mind whatsoever, professionally, that it didn't happen the way the government said. Fires do not. I mean, there were 3 buildings that came down in 130 years. By that time, now 140 years of high-rise steel and concrete building construction, and there were 3 that came down. They all came down that one day in New York.
Well, as I've said on this show before, physics stood down. Where was our physics?
Yeah.
We talk about the air defenses. I say, where were our physics?
Yeah,
it was
Newton. Newton took a holiday. So I mean, it would be funny. It's ludicrous if it hadn't had such serious repercussions. I mean, the 3,000 people. Of course, there are people, and 24 Canadians, and that mandates an investigation by Canadian authorities. If a Canadian is murdered, Canada has to do the investigation. Well, I've subsequently approached MPs from all the parties, Green Party, Red Party, Blue Party, you name it, but they all have the same reaction, which is basically, we don't discuss that. If you get any reaction at all, they just avoid you. You know? So, all right, so...
well, what I love about talking to people from other countries is you see how similar we all really are. The people who know the truth are speaking about it and speaking out, doing pretty much the same things to try to get the information out there. The politicians and the people in the perceived positions of power all act the same too. The same kind of weak dancing around the issue, not wanting to address it, the phony outrage, the anger over asking the question. I mean, it's global, at least in the Western governments.
Oh, sure, and you know, Arabs and Persians and so forth. They are like all middle class people. That's what we're talking about. Their mandate is to fit in. That's why they wear their clubby shirts and the Gucci and Versace. Everybody wants to fit in, just a little bit above average, but you don't want to stick your head out. That's basically what defines the bourgeoisie and the democracy and the middle class. You know, you just sort of you don't want to stand out too much, and that way you can make your way through the golf clubs and all the rest of it, you know. But where was I going with that? So people don't want to address these things. They just want to safely stay quiet and enjoy their life. But you know, I tell them, look, 3,000 years ago, I believe it was Socrates, saw one of his students in the marketplace 3,000 years ago. He walked up to me and he said, I hear you're not interested in politics, young man. That's good, he said. He said, because then politics is very interested in you.
That's a good line.
Well, I didn't write it. That's Socrates, more or less paraphrased. And that's it. You see, you there's no way out. You've got to get involved. So I left you saying that I had paced back and forth. I could not sleep for days. I was trying to figure out what the hell to do with this information. So I contacted two people. One of them was a famous reporter here who, and he had run for mayor and so forth, and another fellow, Bill Vanderzam, I contacted him. Bill was very involved at the time in getting rid of a nasty tax. As the ex-premier of the province, he was getting rid of a nasty tax that another premier had put in, and he succeeded at that, but it kept him very busy. So the other fellow had responded, and he called me, and he asked me to tell him more. I told him more. He said, I'll call you back in a few days. He called me back, and he said, I wonder if you'd address a group. I said, sure. Who is it? Well, it's a secretive organization called a Round Table. I said, never heard of them. Well, he said, they make Attila the Hun look like a left-winger. So he said, but, they're all good people and everything. So I took my son, my youngest son, as my sound and lights man, and I went down there and I presented to them over their lunch hour for an hour. I showed them a Blueprint for Truth, a half-hour short-form video, and I told them what I had found in the interim about the finite element model that NIST had sent us of Building 7, that third building that fell down. How they had studied it and so forth, and what we had found, me and my people, in looking at that heavily redacted piece of mathematics. For your listeners, a finite element, I won't bore you with it, but I mean, it's used to design aircraft and buildings and all sorts of things. And in modern life, and it's basically cutting up mathematically whatever you're going to build into little finite elements, little pieces, and giving each one of those pieces the characteristics, the physical characteristics of the thing that it's actually made of in reality. And so then when you apply forces on it and so forth, in the computer it behaves like it should behave if you've modeled it well, just like reality. So, but in studying the data, you could see that it was fraud. They'd actually modeled it so that they had, for example, the fixity at where the columns and beams meet should have been. They should not move. Well, they had them set at a number where they in the Z direction. Some of them, that is Z up and down, where there was no resistance at all to motion. So that would mean, of course, collapse. And it seemed to be timed. It was 85% redacted what we got. So, I could only see a bit of the garbage in there. It's like going through somebody's garbage can looking for facts. You only find a little bit. But whatever kid they had put in charge of redacting it, I guess he missed some things. So
amazing. So what you saw, just to clarify for our audience, just from the little bit that you saw, you were able to point out that areas that should have been showing some kind of resistance here were marked at 0.
Yeah.
And but it's not going to be at 0 in real life. I mean, that's what you're saying.
No, not unless. That's right. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, not unless it suddenly turned liquid. Suddenly, nothing happens really suddenly unless it's explosive. But in the case of thermite, people keep wanting to hear more explosions and so forth, but that's all a red herring, basically a diversion, because thermite, especially nanothermite, according to the literature that I read, it goes off not silently, but it doesn't make a lot of noise, more like a hissing sound, because it's not so much as it can be tuned to be an explosive, but really, in that case, it would be used as an incendiary, a cutter charge. So you don't need any explosion; you just need it to flash, cut through. Do you know much about thermite?
We've had people on this show before to discuss it, but I was actually going to ask you to go into that about the study with the nanothermite, because I know you've talked about it at length at different venues. Yeah,
well, basically thermite is it's been around for a very long time. It's used in Europe, for example. If you've ever taken a European train, you'll sit in the train and it doesn't make any clack 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 sound because the joints are all it's continuously welded. And the way they do that is they bring in a long piece of track, put it down, nail it down to the ties or attach to the ties, and with about a quarter-inch space in between the two adjoining members, and they put a form around it made out of steel, and they pour in a mixture, which is a thermite mixture, which is basically aluminum. Pure aluminum dust and iron oxide, red rust, just rust. Okay, basically that's what it is. It's mixed up, put it in there, and then you put a little magnesium tape in it, light it off with a match or a lighter, and it will go as the magnesium burns down. The magnesium is hot enough to set off the thermite, and you get a big blast of white grayish powder blasting up. And that is the aluminum oxide, because the oxygen has gone over to the aluminum, burned the aluminum into this stable, fine dust, and left iron, molten iron there. And it's at 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the melting point of steel. Iron basically is around, depending on the alloy, is around 2,600, I believe. So somewhere around there. Don't quote me on this, but somewhere around there. So it's enough to weld it. So then all you do is knock off you take the bolts off of this mold, and you've got basically a nice clean weld, one track to the other. They grind it a bit, and it's ready to go. The same technology is used to cut, because you're producing this extremely hot iron, liquid iron, that can cut if it's directed. Now the other thing is, you see, nanothermite, according to the literature that was written in the late 90s, nanothermite goes off at a much higher temperature, and it's so hot that it would be actually vaporous iron. In fact, it's probably more closer to plasma, which is what you see when you look up at the sun. Sun's plasma. It's the most common state of matter. You've got gas, liquid, solid, and then there's this stuff called plasma. It's what you see when you see a man welder with a torch, not with a torch, but with a rod welding. It's a very bright flash, almost the color of the sun. So that's plasma that he's got there, and so that can be used to cut. And the last paper that I saw on it, I think it was down at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories in Berkeley, outside Berkeley, was that it had tremendous potential for weaponization. And that left a little troubling thing, whenever scientists are saying, well, this stuff would make a tremendous weapon, it is a little troubling. But basically it's, so that goes off at half the temperature of the sun, this nanothermite, which is 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun is 13,000. And the sun produces all sorts of radiation. I don't know what radiation is produced at 6,500, but it's going to be up there. There's going to be, X-ray and all sorts of things that people might confuse with a nuclear blast or something like that. But it's something that, you know, the public, even though you've paid for all that scientific information, it's been kept secret for, what do you call it, national security reasons or something.
Yeah, the National Safety or Construction Safety Team Act basically, it says that they can keep that information quiet under wraps if that releasing it would jeopardize public safety. I'm not sure how releasing information about a building that doesn't exist anymore would jeopardize public safety, but in Nistopia, I guess that makes sense. Now, I want to ask you also, too, because, you know, of your background, you know, metallurgy, and how it's relevant to 9/11. Let's talk about what we see streaming out of the building. And I just want to tell my audience, if you watch videos, maybe we'll have a link to it up at 911freefall.com, but you can see molten metal streaming out of the building, and there's been debate about what that is. So I want you to discuss that and discuss what it is, what it isn't, for our audience.
Yes, well, it sure as hell does not look to me like molten aluminum. Molten aluminum is like mercury. It's the color of mercury, only it's hot. So it's silvery, very silver. It's actually pretty. It's kind of a beautiful thing. What came out of the building, out of the windows, was orangish, yellowish stuff, and that looks like, you know, when a welder is using a cutting torch to cut a piece of steel, you'll see that color coming off, you know, the molten stuff dropping down, red and orange and yellow. That's from the molten steel. What's produced, as I explained before, in a thermitic reaction, is iron. So molten iron or liquid iron or vaporous iron, in the case of nanothermite, is a product of that combustion. So you'll get white dust blown off, volumes of it, as you saw in that collapse, and you'll get molten iron, which indeed was found, and not only evidenced by the stuff pouring out of the building, but by in the dust. In fact, the insurance company was using the assay of the dust to identify whether it was just normal, dirty old New York City dust or stuff from the World Trade Center, because it had a high percentage of very tiny microspheres of iron. Now, in case people are wondering, well, you know, iron could have come just from the collapse of the building. Well, you actually, it's very difficult to make iron, to pull iron out of steel. Of course, steel, one of the components, a major component of steel is iron, but then it's mixed with molybdenum and chromium and all sorts of other carbon and so forth, and to pull out of steel, and it takes a Bessemer process, you know, to do it with high pressure oxygen and so forth to make the steel. To get iron back out is this would be alchemy to get that happen. But there's iron there. Well, where did it come from? And sulfur shouldn't be in the steel. Well, sulfur is used in cutter charges to lower the melting temperature. It's like putting salt on ice. It lowers the melting temperature. So, you know, see, there are some anomalies there, many things that are not explained at all by their hypothesis, their theory that it was just a lucky hit or something like that. In the first place, Building 7, there was no aircraft that hit Building 7. There was no fuel to confuse things, and none of that. So there's no structural damage, except they said there was some falling beams, which is really odd because I mean, it was 200 more yards away from the high World Trade Center, Towers 1 and 2. So.
Right, and now I want to know, like, when you go approach other people in your profession with this information, well, do you, and what happens if you do, when you talk to them about this?
Well, my profession, the people in the profession are no different than the rest of the people on the planet. Just people are people. They like to, professionals like to think that they're in a special category, and indeed they are in that profession. But it doesn't mean that their emotions or anything else are any different than anybody else. In fact, I had one scientist who sitting across the breakfast table from me. He was staying at our place, and he sold his business for I think $35 million or something like that. He was a PhD himself. He's a chemist, biochemist, and so this was no lightweight, brilliant guy. I showed him 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, I think, or ESO, Extra Speak Out. And he sat down at the table and he said, "Gery, I don't care if it's true. I still won't believe it."
Wow. I've heard many people tell that similar story.
Yeah.
There's other people who have stories just like that. That's amazing. That's an amazing statement.
I know you got to rub your ears and... did I hear that? That's what I said. Did I hear you say that? I mean, yeah, and he said something about truthers or whatever. Well, I don't know whether I told him, but I mean, I'd rather be somebody who would like to get at the truth and be called a truther than be called a liar. I mean, what do you take your pick. You either go with the evidence or you go with some fabrication. Well, I mean, if somebody brings me wood and he says this is steel, and I'm supposed to build a high-rise out of the thing, I mean, I have to look at the evidence. I have to look at the documentation. I have to check it. I have to, do my own tests on it, my own due diligence. I have to do my own thinking. And saying to the judge later that, well, they told me it was this guy told me it was steel. That wouldn't go down very well because a lawyer, an engineer, is supposed to do what's called due diligence. And you've got to, you got to do your own thinking.
Right, and that's actually is part of our legal process here. That I saw a story on one of those shows, Dateline or Primetime, whatever, where a man called up McDonald's and talked to the manager, and he was doing a prank, and he pretended to be a police officer, and he instructed this manager that one of the female employees had stolen money, and that she had to strip search the girl in the back room. And I mean, the story gets really bizarre. People can look it up, and I don't really want to go into the details because it gets very disgusting what this guy was telling this woman, and then she gets her boyfriend in there too to do. But they tried to use as a defense that that they didn't that they thought it was a police officer. But the question then came up, and they couldn't use that. They couldn't defend themselves because obviously they're being told to do some things that defies their own common sense. So that didn't fly. You got to use your own brain too. If you're getting ridiculous orders from somebody, even if they claim to be in a position of authority, you still are expected to stand up for yourself, to think for yourself, and know that it's wrong. Same applies here with 9/11. Okay, you talk about if somebody hands you wood instead of steel and says that it's steel, you've got to examine it, look at the documentation, and everything. I mean, if for your average American, you should be able to just look at it and say, dude, this is not steel. This is wood. Give me a break already, and throw it back at them. Yeah. Same thing happens with Building 7. I mean, they can try to come up with some fairy tale and try to keep on jumping on the suitcase to fit it in there and make it seem like it'll make it seem like a fire caused that to happen. But people have to use their common sense and say, no way. I have two eyes. I have a brain. Give me a break already.
Yeah, well, it's difficult for them. In Experts Speak Out, in that DVD, we try to cover that part so that at least those who are running into difficulty explaining the situation to others, at least they have some comfort to know that, well, there is an explanation in psychological terms. And it's, the psychologists call it the cognitive dissonance. I mean, so if something if something doesn't fit what your belief system, you have a choice of either saying, okay, my belief system is wrong to a certain extent, or maybe I can just reject this piece and a piece of evidence and go back to my dream world. And most people would like to do that. They don't want to get involved in politics, as Plato would say, as Socrates would say. They just want to live their lives and leave them alone and so forth. And of course, the bad guys, whoever they are, they prey on that. They rely on that.
Right, and I don't even call it politics. I call it a murder investigation. Now, I saw a video of you where you would talk about a friend of yours who left a very lucrative job in the aerospace industry after he heard about the 9/11 information. Can you talk about that?
Let me see. I believe he's dead now. What are you talking about? He left his job in Texas, and he went up and put up signs in New York saying, "Got dust, call his number." And that's how he eventually collected the samples that sent to various researchers, and then that's where we found the nanothermite in the dust. So, it was it was pretty upsetting to people, and it's still very upsetting to people. But you know what I'm finding, Andrew, is that people who rejected it before, they're bang on now. They're on it, and the doctors, the lawyers, so many of them are starting to talk about it. And basically, what architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth do is, they're sticking to the evidence, who are just sticking to that knitting and not digressing into various hypotheses other than it didn't happen the way the government said, and it seems to we're controlled demolition. Other people are saying that there is something gravely wrong here, and this is going to accelerate as people find their more economic hardship. They're going to wake up, and they are waking
up.
Right.
Other events in the world are causing people to look back at this, because a lot of what's happening now is based off of this particular event. I once had somebody brag to me about how they only care about what happens within their four walls, and he went on to literally point at every single four wall to drive home the point and be smug about it. But now those four walls are starting to close in, and not just on this person, but on every person around there. So it's up to them. And I want to know, what gives you hope? What gives you hope in this movement that we will have a final resolution, that the perpetrators will be found, and this will go down in the history books as what happened?
I don't know about the history books. It seems to always get distorted and rewritten, but what's happening now is, what gives me hope is I see that people and doctors and lawyers, the guys I deal with and friends and acquaintances, they are saying, well, there is something to this. And, when they see the gold price going down and it shouldn't, and people like Bernanke saying that gold isn't money. But you see, the thing is, people have got to internalize these things. They've got to say, where's the problem? Well, the problem's in myself. The problem's me. So long as I do not take responsibility for myself, so long as I keep quiet and think that the problems will go away, so long as I don't stand up and speak, that's the problem. That's the problem. You've got to. You see, when you speak out, all of a sudden you get one in 1,000 might be very, very influential and very powerful. It could be, of course, negative or positive, but you get people galvanized on your side, and just to stay silent is a very selfish, foolish thing. Because there are far more powerful elements out there once they know and understand. And here's another thing that I found out by associating with politics and so forth over the years, is that the politicians are no different than the rest of us. I mean, some of them have the gift of gab, and somehow they find themselves in power because they wanted to I mean, power is a funny thing because, you know, someone will tell you, well, yeah, they get into the office and they sit down, they look around, they see a lot of faces that they don't recognize, and the bureaucracy has been there a lot longer than they have been, and will be there a lot longer after he's gone. So the politician, just like all of us who own a business or whatever, you know, we have a nebulous hold on control of what you are responsible for. So do they. And also, the other thing is, just like the psychologist explained to us about cognitive dissonance, the politicians are just like the rest of us. You don't want to believe that. They'll tell you, you know, in Canada, they'll say, well, that's all been investigated. The Americans did an investigation, and conveniently setting aside our rule of law, which is if a Canadian is murdered, to honor him at the very least, at least protect the rest of us, you have to find out who did it. You don't depend on somebody else. You do your due diligence. It's so then you have to ask yourself, for example, in Canada, they're complicit. It must be, because why else would when they come up with those fabrications, or why would they avoid studying these things? Why? I mean, we've been told by members of Parliament by one member of Parliament that he didn't look into it because he was afraid for his family.
Right, and but the thing is that people are complicit even if they're not actively part of a quote unquote conspiracy. If they're aware of a problem and they look the other way, they're guilty too. Just like if you were a maid in a house where the husband was keeping the wife in a freezer in the basement, and you one day went down there and found the body and you said nothing about it. I mean, you're complicit to a certain level in that crime as well.
Yeah, well, John Stuart Mill said it was sin of omission or commission. I mean, commission is when you go out and murder somebody. Omission is when you see it's going to happen and you do nothing to prevent it.
And that is all the time we have for this program. Thank you for listening. Remember, folks, you can listen to this program every Thursday night at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific on No Lies Radio. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.